Hello and welcome to another episode of Century of Service. My name is Wes Krause, curator of the South Alberta Light Horse Regimental Museum. With me today is retired Major Paul Mast.
And this is part of the ongoing interviews we're having with our military personnel in and around Medicine Hat, and for those that are involved in the South Alberta Light Horse Regiment.
And today we have Warrant Officer Doug Fode, a member of the South Alberta Light Horse. Warrant Officer Fode started with the regular force and then came to the South Alberta Light Horse.
And Doug, can you give us some experiences of your time in the regular force as well as what motivated you to join the reserves?
I joined the South Alberta Light Horse. I'm a native Medicine Hatter, born and bred here and grew up in the 60s and 70s. I joined the Army Cadets in the 80s and then progressed to the reserves in, I guess would have been 1986. And then I spent a year here at the reserves and I joined the regular force as a combat engineer. Did 10 years with them and then came back to the reserves.
Doug, what do combat engineers do in the regular force?
Combat engineers are, they are the engineering, the builders of the armed forces. So in a combat role, they build roads, bridges, keeping the whole army mobile, right, during the advance, and then denying the enemy the same mobility during the retreat by blowing up things.
So they're involved in demolitions quite heavily and also building and preparing defenses?
Yeah, the fortifications, yeah, and all the explosive denial, landmines, whatever's really required for the situation.
And what was your trade in the combat engineers?
I started off as a combat engineer, which was working in a section of combat engineers within a troop context, and we did everything that was required. If it was laying minefields or breaching minefields, doing any demolition, doing any fortification building, the whole 9 yards. And then later on I specialized in heavy equipment.
So with the local regiment, the reserves, being an armored regiment, how did your engineering experience translate to?
Really not. There's a lot of common Army courses that I did. They're the same for every trade regardless. So those helped me a lot. And the one specialty course I did was the tank driving and armored driver, which helped me along with this trade. But everything else I had to learn from scratch as an armored reconnaissance soldier.
Now that you're an armored reconnaissance soldier, what does armored reconnaissance do?
Armored reconnaissance is the element. We're medium reconnaissance, so our job is to go into that no man's ground between two opposing forces and bring that ground to life for the commanders. So we're actually the eyes and ears on the ground. We are deployed anywhere to 12 to 24 kilometers ahead of the main body, and then we are developing a picture, right? Where the enemy is, what the ground looks like, you know, what routes are accessible, things like that.
So you would do like forward observations as well as reconnaissance?
We can be used as a forward observation in a screening position to watch for the enemy if we had to stop and do a hasty defensive and we want to make sure the enemy isn't coming from certain directions. Yeah, they deploy us in a screen in front of them. You
came in and spent a number of years as the regimental recruiting NCO. Any interesting experiences in that area?
There's actually a lot of, I actually worked as a Canadian Forces recruiter working out of Medicine Hat, so we had an office here, and I applied for the job and got it. But some of the interesting experience was working in the communities around southeastern Alberta, out in Tabor, meeting just a lot of really good people and people with a lot of former experience, not just from Canada, but from around the world. You know, I joined the Army back in the 80s because of the Cold War and all that stuff was going on. And, you know, to meet people from the Ukraine and Russia who had served at the same period and got a chance to talk with them and, you know, find out what their point of view on the whole situation. That was really interesting. I actually once met a Soviet veteran from World War II, and that was quite an emotional experience.
Were you involved with a local flood mitigation plan?
Yes. Well, not the mitigation plan, but the actual response that we did here in Medicine Hat. I was the operations warrant for the regiment at the time when we got called up. And so we all arrived here and waited for our orders, and eventually they decided to leave us in place because Calgary had already, the flood had swept through Calgary and was coming down here. So they left us in place, and our troops were phenomenal. You have to realize at the time we didn't field a lot of troops. We only had about 21 troops that showed up, but the majority of our troops were actually away for summer training. So we could not call them back. So it was the guys that, you know, have full-time jobs and families that don't go away for the summer. They came in, and it was absolutely amazing. The boys worked really, really hard. We did 2 phases. The first phase was filling sandbags, and 12 guys filled about 27,000 sandbags in an 18-hour period, which is insane. And then, of course, after the sandbagging, we got some well-rested, well-deserved sleep, and then we moved on to actually patrolling the defenses against breaches from the river.
You worked with a lot of the local citizens laying sandbags.
No, our guys were just filling sandbags. We were up at the up on Crescent Heights where they had the stockpile, and they just filled. A lot of the citizens came by and helped. There was a lot of volunteer, but our guys were there for an 18-hour stretch straight through and just worked. There was a lot of positive comments from the people that worked with them, saying that they worked. They were machines, is what I heard a lot. So it was good.
There was some regular force personnel that responded down here in Medicine Hat during the flood. And this was the 3rd PPCLI, which of course is the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. What were your experiences working directly with them?
With them, we didn't work directly with the lower elements, but at my level we were working with the command elements, and it was a very positive experience. The task force commander that came down, or battalion commander that came down, you know, he had it in his head that they were here to help out. They weren't here to take over, and that's exactly what they did. It was a really good experience. So he used us to the best of his abilities. And
how many of those troops were down here?
I don't have the figures offhand. It was in around the 800 mark, I believe. So it was quite a surge. They were pulling. I know they were pulling like the elements of the Lord Strathcona Horse Regiment came down. They were pulled out of Camrose or Canmore. Canmore? Maybe it was Canmore. They were pulled out of there because there was really nothing they could do at that point anymore. So they were pushed down here, which it worked out pretty good because as they rolled in, we had a big breach at the power plant, and they were literally 4 hours on the road in armored vehicles, pulled right into the power station and started throwing sandbags at a hole.
Is there any particular memory that sticks out in your mind other than the fact of how well the guys worked together?
The floods itself, I think the biggest thing was before we knew what was going to happen, or we had a good idea what was going to happen. And when we went up to the emergency operations center for Medicine Hat, they were anticipating the worst case scenario. And because we have 2 rivers, both of them were flooding, and you know, we have the South Saskatchewan, which is formed by the Old Man and the Bow River, right? And at that point, all the data pointed that both those rivers were going to crest and form a super crest, which would hit Medicine Hat. And they were quite scared that the city was going to be cut in 2. They were totally prepared to lose 3 out of the 4 bridges. So that was kind of interesting. And then luckily it didn't. The crest came at different times. They came like 12 hours apart. But it still was way more than the flood we had back in, was it 95?
1995?
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about the flood, Doug?
The flood experience was, it was good to get out in the community and to see the community work together and everyone pulling together, and it was a good positive experience in a lot of ways, even though there was a lot of negative damage afterwards, and a lot of people have gone through a lot of hardships since then. But I mean, you know, there's always a silver lining to things. But overall, I was really impressed with everything, the response that the regular force gave, the response of the unit here in Medicine Hat.
So right now you're a part-time soldier, although you were full-time. But what is your present job?
Currently, I'm working as a supervisor for BADIS out at Suffield. I supervise a shop of approximately 8 guys, and we work in targetry, building all the targets and issuing and receiving the special equipment that they use to build their ranges.
How has your military experience helped in your day-to-day job?
Oh, greatly. A lot of courses as a supervisor, a lot of the courses, man management skills and leadership skills that I've learned and developed through my years in the Canadian Forces directly translate into my supervisory role because it's the same forms, same formats, it's the same hierarchy. So yeah, it come in very handy.
Doug, do you think the military experience helps you in your civilian job?
Oh, most definitely. A lot of the trades in the armed forces, you can't. How can I explain this? They don't have a lot of direct correlation. Like an infantry guy, there's not a lot of call for infantry and armored and artillery in the civilian street, but it's the intangible skill sets that we learn, leadership, management, integrity, trust, all those things that make a good person, and that comes through. Especially working as a recruiter, a lot of employers talk about how people are late or don't show up at all, and that's just a foreign concept to a soldier. We're always 15 minutes early, right? If you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. So the dependability that soldiers have is a great contribution to any civilian employer, and their work ethic, because we're just so used to doing whatever we need to do to get the job done.
I noticed the poppy on your uniform. Does Remembrance Day have any special significance to you?
Well, 20 plus years in the Canadian Forces, I've lost friends, training accidents, operations, so it does. My father is a World War II vet, so yeah, most definitely. It's a time to remember.
Well, thank you so much for your work you have done with the regiment, and also the work you did with the operation regarding the flood. Now, to our viewers, thank you for watching another installment of Century of Service. Tune in to Shaw Cable for the next episode.